Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. This week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo starts with stories from the road. Back in April of 1969, I was out hitchhiking around the country, and I found myself hitchhiking from central New Jersey up toward Maine. My object in hitchhiking was not to get anywhere in a hurry. It was just to be out wandering about. And so I would avoid the main roads. I'd avoid the big cities. I'd do anything I could to stay on the tiniest little black lines that I could find on maps. So going from central New Jersey up toward Maine, you can cut off through New York City, of course, which was not my object. Or you can head north and you can cut across a little tip of Pennsylvania that comes out between New Jersey and then loop back into New York up into the Catskill Mountains. Well, I was going across that little cut off there of Pennsylvania, and it was springtime. It was April. It was cold. It was rainy. I'd been out for, a week or so. And I was walking along. I had an old woolen sleeping bag. It was World War II surplus that one of my aunts had given me. I had my box of paints, one of those wooden boxes. Not exactly a conscious hitchhiker, not exactly a conscious walker. I was just taking what I had and hitting out on the road with it. Of course, I had a toothbrush. That's one of the things that I won't go without, but you can do without toothpaste as long as you have a toothbrush. So I was walking along, and it was cold. It was up in the mountains. I was out in the mountainous country, and it was beautiful mountain country. I, being from the West, of course, I'm used to having pretty open spaces. But back east, other than in the cities themselves, it's all really quite dense hardwood forests, which is why, of course, the falls are so beautiful and so famous. I didn't know that then. All I was walking around were trees that had just leaved out. It was getting to where you couldn't see through the forests because the leaves were getting dense enough in April. But it was still springtime, it was still cold, and I just went through some letters that I had written home, and it turns out that it was on a Thursday in April that I was walking along in Pennsylvania, and I had been walking all day in the rain. It was my custom not to stick my thumb out. As I said, I wasn't in a big hurry to get anywhere. I was just out for the adventure, and if people wanted to pick me up, that was fine. And if they didn't, well, I was enjoying the walk. It was perfectly pleasant. I must admit my shoulders got really sore from this sleeping bag, which I had tied with a rope, slung over one shoulder, and carrying a wooden box with the other was, I was doing a lot of stopping and adjusting weight. But I was getting along fine and just meandering down the road. So I got to where it was getting toward the end of the day. I didn't know exactly when because I didn't have a watch. But I was walking down this very, very narrow road. I think that it had a stripe down the middle of it, but I couldn't tell you for sure about that. I remember that the road, of course, was fenced in on both sides by the forests, and that's really all you could see. It's like when you're traveling in Oregon over on the coast, all you can see is this column of forest that you're going through. But I did see down at the bottom of this little hill that I came over, at the bottom of the little valley I was heading into, there was a little wide spot cut out in the side of the road. And I thought, well, we'll see what's there. When I got there, it turned out to be a town, except that there was really nothing in this town except the post office. That's literally all there was as far as I can recall. Well, it just turned out that a post office is just what I needed. I had a letter that I wanted to mail home. I thought that it was a little bit too heavy for this stamp that I had, and I didn't have a great resource of stamps. I was, well, my getting down to half a can of beans and 12 cents a few days after this adventure is another story. But I was, getting along on what I had. It turns out that I had stopped by a fruit stand and had bartered one of my precious paintings for a cup of cottage cheese. So I did have that, so I wasn't starving. Well, I did need a post office, as I said. However, I didn't know what time it was, and I knew that it was fairly late. But the light was on, and I did see somebody in there. So I went over and I tried the door. The door opened. So I thought, well, that's good. And I walked in, and sure enough, the only person in there was the postmaster, and he was closing up. He had his till out. He was counting his change. He was counting his stamps. But I did ask him, by the way, would you mind if you're busy, I'll come back tomorrow or do it some other time, but would you mind letting me know if this letter needs more postage? And I think it did need a penny or two more. And so I asked if I could purchase it, and he said, sure, I'll be glad to sell you that. And I got the stamp, and I went over and, I don't know, addressed the envelope or something and put the stamp on. And came back and asked him if I should just drop this in the dropper if he wanted to take it. And, being a waiter, you learn to gab, and so we sat there and gabbed a little bit. He asked what I was up to, and I told him I was from Idaho and out in the East Coast having my adventure. Well, everything was very cordial, and I was leaving, and he stopped me. He says, hey, by the way. I says, yeah. He says, so you're just out walking around? I says, yeah. He says, well, would you like a place to stay for the night? Well, would I ever? Let me tell you, after you've been walking in the rain all day with a wool backpack that's getting heavier and heavier, and knowing that it's wet to sleep in, plus just, after you've been on the road a few days, just the concept of being able to get dry and warm and have your clothes washed. I can't tell you how wonderful that is. So I jumped on the opportunity, and I thanked him. Well, he called his wife, and he took me to his home. We left within minutes of this having happened. Very nice home, very lovely 3-bedroom house up a little drive on one of the hills around there. And very cordial family, a lovely, lovely wife. And they were about ready to sit down to dinner, so they made room for me. And his 2 daughters, who were probably in the 6th and, 7th grade, something like that at the time, maybe 8th. They were, of course, completely enthralled with this guy with stories of LA and stories of Idaho. Is that Ohio? I'm not sure what. And I had lots of stories to tell, and they were all wrapped. And then when it was all over, I insisted on washing the dishes as a thank you for their hospitality. Well, they insisted I not do the dishes, that the girls would do it. And I assured them that no, I would really be honored to do their dishes, and I did. So the girls dried, and of course they were so amazed that this person would be willing to wash dishes. So that got their enthusiasm going in even more. It was all quite charming. Well, when all of that was over, of course, we sat down and we had a nice conversation for several hours. You have to remember, this is 1969. I was a long-haired guy hitchhiking around, sleeping in sleeping bags. I, of course, was on one side of the great divide that was going on in our country at the time. And here was a gentleman with a family and a job, and he was pretty much on what we considered the other side of that great divide that was going on in the country at the time. As we were talking, it didn't matter to me who he was. He was a great guy, and he didn't seem to matter to him that I was a long-haired hippie. He seemed to enjoy my company. At one point, he kind of stopped the conversation. I don't remember just how we got to this topic, but We probably were talking about what I'd just been mentioning to you about what's going on in politics and the rift in the country at that time and things like that. And he stopped the conversation and he says, I have a son in Vietnam. And I hope that if he's cold and wet and hungry, somebody takes him in. Well, that is the gist of it, isn't it? That night I was laying in their son's bed, this bed that they had built and raised this boy that they loved in. And there was a picture of him on the knick-knack stand in the corner of the room. A picture of him in his uniform, in his dress uniform. Obviously they were very proud of him, and they should have been. He was a great-looking young guy, basically a boy, maybe 2 years younger than I was, a young man. And I looked at that picture and I thought of that guy whose bed I was sleeping in, being over in Vietnam. And I thought of my being fortunate enough to be in his bed at that moment, and the people who took me in. And yeah, I thought of my folks back in Idaho who had a boy out exploring the world. It's time to drive Steens Mountain. Good old Oregon. It's known for the Willamette Valley and the coast. But out here on the eastern side of Oregon, there's a big hole that I always thought was just filled with desert. Lordy, was I ever wrong about that. There's some great country just waiting for a little 1 or 2 or 3 day drive right in our back door. A good excuse to go adventuring in this country is driving to the top of Steens Mountain. The Steens Mountains are the ones that you see off to the west as you drive from Winnemucca to Jordan Valley. Getting to the top of Steens Mountain itself can be rather difficult because of snow. For that reason, I decided to go in July of the year 2008. In past exciting episodes of Drive Steens, we've gone to Gentura, Diamond, and then we got down to French Glen. It took us several episodes to get up to Steens Mountain itself, and then back down a rough and rugged road. On our last Drive Steens, we went from where we came off of Steens Mountain all the way down to Alturas, California. What a day that drive was. Got up in Diamond, Oregon, drove up Steens Mountain, drove down Steens Mountain on an extremely rough little road that took close to an hour to go 4 miles. Had lunch at Field Station, did a foolish thing I haven't done since I was in my 20s, and suffered for it for miles. Fortunately, the gods of gasoline smiled upon me, and I was able to get enough gasoline in a Dell to make it to Lakeview, where I gladly topped off the tank. From there, I drove down and ended up in the very northeast corner of California. Now that's a day's drive and lots of adventure. And after that day's drive, I was glad to find a friend's house just south of Alturas and spend a few days out wandering around the meadows around his place. They tell me on clear days you can see Mount Shasta looking out toward the west. I was not fortunate enough to be there on a clear day apparently, so I had to settle for just enjoying the great countryside. On my last evening there, we enjoyed a lovely sunset, a delightful meal, and sitting on the front porch watching the world go by. When I started heading back, I left my friend's place and couldn't resist a last photograph where they were repairing the roads. I noticed these interesting rock formations on the road going back into Alturas, and I discovered lovely little Alturas. I was really impressed with what a spiffy and friendly town Alturas is. Some great architecture, Alturas is the county seat of Modoc County, and Alturas is the county's only incorporated city. The local newspaper talked about the important things, like getting a street signal, the 2000 census listed the population of Alturas at 2,892. Alturas was originally known as Doris Bridge and later Dorisville. It was named after Presley and James Doris, who built a bridge across the Pitt River that runs through town. The post office box for Doris Bridge was established in 1871. 5 years later, in 1876, the name of the post office was changed to Alturas. I noticed this lady watering her flowers, and I just couldn't help but go in and check out a store that had a John Deere tractor windmill sitting in front of it. It turns out the young lady watering her flowers is named Paula, and she was a delight to chat with. This very colorful store had everything that the tourist or the local might need. The name of this fine establishment is the Belligerent Duck. Their card shows a duck with a shotgun going out on the hunt. I needed to get a couple of memory cards for my camera, and sure enough, Paula was most helpful, taking me out on the street and showing me that there was a Radio Shack just down the way. Not only did the Radio Shack have the memory cards I needed, but it also had Pete. It turns out Pete is a professional photographer. He had taken the photographs that were on most of the postcards that I got at the Belligerent Duck. And we ended up having a great conversation about photography, technology, and the changing times. To top it all off, the memory cards I was looking for were on sale. 2 for the price of 1. Now that's small town hospitality. Driving north, I took pictures of a last couple of buildings in Alturas and headed over to Highway 299 towards Cedarville and what is called the Surprise Valley. This is Cedar Pass in the Modoc National Forest. brings us to Cedarville, where we will pull a block off the road to Cedarville Park and begin exploring another lovely northeast corner of California town on our next journey of driving Steens. This here's Mechanic Mac with a road tip for you to keep you safe when you're on the road. This here road tip is brought to you as a public service of this here TV show. Today I'm going to be telling you how to stay out of trouble with a real problem these days, and that's road rage. So this is how you keep yourself safe from road rage. Now, supposing you do cause an accident, maybe a rear ender or even just bumping into somebody or a telephone pole. Well now, the very first thing you do to keep yourself safe from road rage, in fact, even before the other person has a chance to get out of the car and look at you, in fact, especially before they have a chance to get out of the car and look at you, the very first thing you do to avoid road rage if you cause an accident, before anything else, is you hang up your phone. And that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next week. And in the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo!